Joel Hadley was standing in front of the entire maintenance floor when Human Resources Director Renata Voss told him to hand over his keycard. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He set the keycard on the corner of her clipboard with the same deliberate care he used when setting down a torque wrench, and he walked toward the exit with his bag over one shoulder and grease still under his fingernails from a job he had finished 4 hours before most people in that building had woken up. Nobody stopped him. A few people looked at the floor. One of the younger apprentices, a kid named Tyler who Joel had been mentoring for the better part of 8 months, took a half step forward and then stopped himself, which Joel noticed and which he would think about later, alone in his truck in the parking lot, with his hands resting on the steering wheel and nowhere particular to go. The reason given was abandonment of shift. He had clocked in 43 minutes late that morning. In 11 years at Meridian Fleet Services, it was the first time he had ever been late for anything. Renata Voss had been with Meridian for 6 years, which was long enough to know the procedures and short enough to believe that following them precisely was the same as following them wisely. She was not a cruel person. She was a careful one. When she pulled Joel's file that morning and saw the attendance record, 11 years, spotless, not a single incident, she paused, she noted it. She set it aside. The directive had come from the top. Meridian Fleet Services managed the maintenance contracts for 12 commercial transport companies operating across Ontario and Manitoba. The company's founder, a man named Douglas Crane, had built it from a 2-bay shop in Thunder Bay in the early 90s, and when he retired, he had handed operational control to his daughter. That daughter was Cecily Crane, who had a master's degree in operations management from the University of Toronto, who had spent 3 years restructuring 2 mid-size logistics firms before she was 35, and who had walked into Meridian's Hamilton facility at 7:45 that morning with a presentation for the Northgate Transport Board scheduled at 9 and a mechanic missing from the floor. Cecily Crane did not believe in exceptions. She believed in standards, and she believed in the message that inconsistency sent to an organization. She had said this, more or less, in a LinkedIn post that had gotten 400 likes the previous spring. She told Renata to process the termination before 9. The presentation was the priority. What Cecily did not know, what no one told her, because the person who could have told her had already been walked out of the building, was that Joel Hadley had spent the previous night in the facility. He had been called in at 9:15 the evening before by the night supervisor, a man named Arthur Peel, because one of the company's vehicles was scheduled for a third-party inspection at 7 the next morning, and something was wrong with it. Not obviously catastrophically wrong, subtly wrong. The kind of wrong that a less experienced technician might have cleared with a code reset and a signature, and that would have failed the inspection badly enough to flag a regulatory review. The vehicle in question was a 2019 Peterbilt 579 that Meridian used for executive and client transport. It was not a standard fleet unit. It had been purchased specifically for Cecily Crane's use, upgraded with a custom interior package and a Cummins engine that had been retrofitted after the original powertrain developed issues the previous winter. It was the vehicle she used for client visits, airport pickups, and, 3 times in the past year, the annual Northgate Transport Board trip from Hamilton to the regional office in Barrie. The fault was in the engine management system. A sensor in the after-treatment assembly had been throwing intermittent codes for 2 weeks, and someone had cleared them twice without logging the underlying cause. The 3rd time, the system had flagged a fault that would not clear with a reset, because the fault was real, a failing DEF injector that, left unaddressed, would trigger a forced regen cycle at the worst possible moment and potentially strand the vehicle, or, more seriously, cause it to derate to limp mode on a highway. Arthur Peel knew enough to know the job was beyond him. He called Joel. Joel drove in on his own time in his personal truck at 9:30 at night. He diagnosed the fault, ordered the part through the emergency supplier account, waited for the delivery at 11:40, and spent the next 4 hours replacing the injector, running the regen cycle manually, clearing the system, and doing a full inspection of the after-treatment assembly to make sure nothing else had been masked by the repeated code clears. He finished at 4:17 in the morning. The vehicle ran clean. He drove home to his house in Ancaster, where his daughter Ivy was asleep in her room with the nightlight on that she still used, even though she was 8 years old, and had recently informed him, with great seriousness, that she was not a baby anymore. He showered. He changed. He sat at the kitchen table and ate half a bowl of cereal and looked at the photograph on the refrigerator, the one of Ivy, at 6, gap-toothed and laughing in a life jacket on a rented canoe somewhere north of Parry Sound, which was the last trip he and his wife had taken before she got sick. He sat there longer than he meant to. Then he lay down on the couch for what he told himself would be 30 minutes, and he woke up at 7:52. The woman who usually watched Ivy before school had called at 6:30 while he was sleeping to say her own child was ill and she couldn't come. He had missed the call. He saw it when he woke up. He called 2 other people, a neighbor and his sister-in-law, and reached neither of them. He packed Ivy's bag himself, drove her to school, watched her walk through the front doors, and drove to Meridian with his hands tight on the wheel and his stomach already telling him what he was about to walk into. He walked in at 8:43. Renata Voss was waiting near the door. Arthur Peel was not on shift that morning. He worked nights and had gone home at 7. He did not know about the termination until he came back in at 3 that afternoon and found Joel's locker cleared out. He stood in front of that locker for a full minute before he went looking for anyone who could explain it to him. He found Kwame Asante, the day shift floor supervisor, who told him what had happened. Arthur listened. He did not say anything immediately. He was the kind of man who processed things quietly and thoroughly before speaking, which was a quality Joel had always respected in him, and which was part of why the two of them had gotten along well for going on 7 years. She fired him, Arthur said. It was not a question. Renata processed it, Kwame said carefully. The call came from upstairs. Arthur went to his truck and sat there for a while. He thought about the night before. He thought about Joel showing up at 9:30, unasked, unpaid, with the kind of diagnostic patience that takes a decade to build. He thought about what would have happened at the 7 o'clock inspection if the job had not been done. He thought about the board presentation. He thought about whose vehicle it was. He went back inside and asked to speak with Renata Voss. Renata listened to Arthur with the expression of someone who understood, within the first 30 seconds, that she had made a mistake. Not procedurally, but in the larger sense that occasionally intrudes on procedural thinking when it is too late to be comfortable. She asked him to wait. She pulled up the after-hours work log for the previous evening. The entry wasn't there. Arthur frowned. He had submitted it himself, through the internal system, before he left at 7. He was certain of it. He walked Renata through the system, showed her where the entry should have been, and showed her that it was not there. What Renata did not know, and what would take another 4 days to fully establish, was that the submission had gone through a secondary approval queue that defaulted to the facility manager on duty. That facility manager had been Leonard Varga, who had held his position for 9 years, and who had, over the past 18 months, developed a quietly antagonistic relationship with Joel Hadley over a series of work practice disagreements that Joel had been correct about, and Leonard had not wanted to acknowledge. Leonard Varga had seen the entry, had not approved it, and had allowed it to expire without notation. Whether this was intentional or negligent, whether Leonard had understood the consequence of what he was doing, or had simply dismissed the entry out of habit and resentment, was not something Renata could establish that afternoon. What she could establish was the outcome, and the outcome was sitting in a truck somewhere in Ancaster with no job and an 8-year-old daughter and 11 years of service that had been ended before anyone had asked a single question. She called Cecily Crane's assistant. Cecily was still in the building. The Northgate presentation had gone well. The vehicle had performed without incident, which she had noted only abstractly, the way one notes the functioning of things one has not thought to be grateful for. She was in her office reviewing the follow-up materials when the call came. She listened to Renata's summary in silence. She asked one question, whether the vehicle in question was the Peterbilt. Renata confirmed that it was. There was a pause. "Get me the after-hours log," Cecily said. "The original submission. I want to see the timestamp." Renata sent it within the hour. The timestamp was 6:58 a.m. The submission had been made before Joel Hadley had even left the building. Cecily read the work order twice. She noted the fault description, the part number, the hours logged. She noted the time the delivery was received. She noted the time the inspection sign-off was completed. She sat with that for a while, because she was, if nothing else, precise, and the precision of what she was reading required her to sit with it honestly, rather than move past it. Joel had arrived at the facility, on his own initiative, at 9:30 at night. He had worked until 4 in the morning. He had fixed her vehicle, in time for her presentation. He had driven home, fallen asleep on a couch, been let down by his childcare, gotten his daughter to school, and driven back to work 43 minutes late, and she had ordered him fired. She closed the document and looked at the window for a moment. Then she called Renata back. "I need his contact information," she said, "and I need Leonard Varga in my office at 2 o'clock. What followed in the next 48 hours was not pleasant, and Cecily did not pretend that it was. She called Joel herself. She had expected, in some part of her, that he would be hostile, that the call would be defensive, that she would have to manage it the way she managed difficult conversations, with structure and precision and a certain deliberate distance. She had prepared for that. What she had not prepared for was the silence after she finished speaking, a long, honest silence, not angry, just tired. "I don't want an apology," Joel said eventually. "I understand that," Cecily said. "My daughter was standing at the front door of her school at 8:15 in the morning, because her father was trying to get back to a job he'd already worked all night for. And then I walked in and handed over my key card in front of the whole floor." He paused. "You can't undo that." "No," Cecily said. "I can't." There was another silence, and in it Cecily heard something she had not expected to hear, which was the sound of her own conduct, described without dramatization or grievance, just plainly, by a person who was too tired for either. "I'd like you to come back," she said. "Full reinstatement. I'll make the restoration of your file a matter of formal record. The board will know the circumstances." "Why the board?" Joel asked. "Because the termination was a leadership decision," Cecily said, "and so is this." Joel took 3 days before he gave her an answer. He spent one of those days doing nothing much, sitting with Ivy in the backyard after school, watching her try to teach the neighbor's dog a trick involving a plastic ring, making dinner, doing dishes with the radio on. The ordinary mechanics of a life that continued operating even when the structure around it shifted. He spent another day thinking about what it meant to go back. Not the job itself. He had no issue with the work. He had always loved the work. He loved the specificity of it, the way a problem had a cause, and a cause had a solution, and a solution, done correctly, held. What he was thinking about was whether the conditions that had led to the morning of his firing had been addressed in any structural way, or whether he was being asked to return to the same building with different furniture arrangement. On the 3rd day, he called his brother-in-law, a man named Glenn, who had worked trades his whole life and who had the particular clarity of someone who has made expensive mistakes and learned from them without bitterness. Glenn listened to the whole story without interrupting. "She called you herself," Glenn said. "Yeah, not HR, not a lawyer, yeah." Glenn was quiet for a moment. "That's worth something," he said. "It doesn't fix it, but it's worth something." Joel thought about that. He came back on a Tuesday. He walked through the main entrance at 7 sharp, which was what he had done for 11 years, and which felt the same as it always had. The smell of the floor, the lights overhead, the sound of the bay doors opening at the far end. Kwame was at the supervisor station and nodded at him, which Joel returned without ceremony. Tyler, the apprentice, was waiting near the lockers. "I didn't know what to do," Tyler said. He looked like he had been practicing the sentence and was relieved to be done with it. "When they were, I should have said something." Joel opened his locker. The combination was the same. "You've got maybe 30 seconds in a moment like that," he said. "Nobody tells you that until after. Now you know." Tyler nodded. Joel could see that it wasn't quite enough, that Tyler would carry the moment a while longer, which was probably how it should be. The formal board disclosure happened the following week. Cecily presented the circumstances of the termination and reinstatement to the Meridian Board herself, without delegation, which she had promised Joel she would do, and which she did. She described the failure of the after-hours log system, the manner in which the submission had been handled by the facility manager on duty, and the decision-making chain that had led to the termination. Leonard Varga had resigned the Friday after Cecily's investigation concluded, before a formal process could be initiated. The resignation was accepted. The log approval system was revised. Joel was not present for the board meeting. He was on the floor, where he had been asked to supervise a third-party inspection of 4 fleet units scheduled for the quarter. He did the work with the same attention he had always brought to it, which was to say completely. At the end of the day, Cecily came down to the floor. It was the first time she had done that, come to the floor without a specific purpose, without a client or a board member or a presentation at stake. She looked slightly out of place in it, which was honest, and which Joel respected. She stopped a few feet away from the Peterbilt. "The board asked about you," she said. "What did they ask?" "Whether you would be staying." Joel glanced at the vehicle. It sat the same as any piece of well-maintained equipment, functional, unassuming, with no visible record of the hands that had kept it that way. "What did you tell them?" "I told them that was your decision to make," Cecily said. "That I'd done what I could to make the conditions worth staying in." Joel considered that. It was a careful answer. It was also an honest one, and in his experience, those two qualities did not always coincide. "I'll be here tomorrow," he said. Cecily nodded. She started to leave, then paused. "The presentation," she said. "The Northgate one. It went well. She said it the way someone says a thing they should have sooner." "I heard," Joel said. She left. Joel closed up his station, gathered his tools with the methodical care of a person who has spent a lifetime knowing that the condition in which you leave a workspace is a reflection of the condition in which you enter it. And he drove home to Ancaster, where Ivy was waiting with a drawing she had made at school, a somewhat abstract rendering of a red truck that she explained, at length and with great authority, was his truck and not just a truck in general, which he told her he could see completely, even though he could not, because she was 8 and she had made it for him, and some things you simply look at for what they are.